Monitors beeped in slow, careless rhythms while Maya Jefferson bent forward in the stiff plastic chair, pressing her palm against the sharp pain twisting through her abdomen. Sweat soaked the collar of her gray hoodie. The emergency room lights were too bright, too white, exposing every flinch, every tremble. She had arrived 2 hours ago, doubled over, whispering to the triage nurse that something felt wrong, deeply, terrifyingly wrong. "It's probably cramps," the nurse had said without looking up for long. "On a scale of 1 to 10, 10, Maya whispered. "It feels like something is tearing inside me." The nurse gave her a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's not exaggerate, I'll put you down for a 6. A white woman who arrived 30 minutes later with a sprained wrist was already being wheeled past her toward a treatment room. Maya's husband, Darius, stood at the desk again. "She can barely breathe," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Can someone please check her?" A different nurse sighed. "Sir, we go by priority. Have a seat." Priority. Maya tried to sit up straighter, tried to look less desperate. She had learned that lesson years ago. Don't cry too loud. Don't look angry. Don't raise your voice. Pain, for women like her, was always suspicious. Another wave hit. Her vision blurred. She clutched Darius's arm so hard her nails dug into his skin. "I'm going to faint," she whispered. "You're not fainting," a passing nurse said casually. "You're anxious, anxious." Maya had given birth to 2 children without screaming. She knew anxiety. This wasn't anxiety. This was something spreading, something burning. 3 hours after arrival, her name still hadn't been called. Darius pulled out his phone. "I'm recording this," he said quietly. "Just in case." Maya forced a weak smile. "Don't make trouble." "I already feel trouble," he replied. Finally, a young resident stepped into the waiting area. "Maya Jefferson." Darius nearly shouted with relief. He helped her stand. Her legs buckled. Inside the exam room, the resident glanced at the chart. "Abdominal pain for a few hours. Since this morning," Maya said. "It's getting worse." He pressed lightly on her stomach. She gasped. "You're very tense," he said. "Have you been under stress?" "I'm not stressed," she breathed. "Something is wrong." He ordered basic blood work but no imaging, no CT scan, no ultrasound. "The results will take a bit," he said, already halfway out the door. Another hour passed. Maya's lips turned pale. Her hoodie clung to her skin. Darius paced the hallway until a nurse snapped, "Sir, sit down." When the blood work came back, the resident skimmed it quickly. "Levels are slightly elevated, but nothing alarming. We can give you something for pain and discharge you with instructions to rest." "Discharge?" Darius stared at him. "She can't even stand." The resident hesitated. "We're very busy tonight." "Busy!" The hospital board in the hallway showed available imaging rooms. Maya tried to swing her legs off the bed. A sharp, unbearable explosion of pain ripped through her. She screamed. The scream echoed down the corridor. For the first time, staff moved quickly, not toward her, but toward the noise. "What's going on?" a senior nurse demanded. "She's being dramatic," someone muttered. Darius stepped between them and the bed. "She is not dramatic. She is dying." Those words hung heavy in the sterile air. The senior nurse finally ordered a scan, almost reluctantly, but there was a wait. There was always a wait. Maya's blood pressure began to drop. A monitor alarmed softly. A nurse silenced it without comment. Darius's recording captured everything: the delays, the dismissive tones, the way no one met his eyes for long. When they finally wheeled Maya to Imogen, nearly 6 hours had passed since she first walked in. The technician frowned at the screen. "Hold on." Another technician stepped closer. Their whispers grew urgent. Within minutes, the calm indifference transformed into chaos, a rupture, internal bleeding, a condition that required immediate surgery hours ago. They rushed her toward the operating room, shouting codes into the intercom. Darius ran alongside the gurney until double doors slammed in his face. He stood alone in the hallway, phone still recording. No one explained how something not alarming had become catastrophic. 47 minutes later, a surgeon approached him, mask hanging loose, eyes heavy. "I'm sorry," she said. The words didn't register at first. "We did everything we could, everything." "But not when she asked. Not when she begged. Not when she said it was a 10. Darius felt the world narrow into silence. "She was here for 6 hours," he said faintly. 6 hours. The surgeon looked down. An internal rupture that early imaging would have caught. Bleeding that could have been controlled. A life that could have been saved. Instead, she had been labeled anxious, dramatic, exaggerating. By morning, Maya Jefferson was gone. The hospital released a short statement expressing sympathy. They cited unexpected complications, but Darius had the footage. The video began with Maya hunched over in the waiting room. It ended with alarms screaming in the operating corridor. When he posted it online, he didn't add commentary. He didn't need to. The internet did the rest. Viewers watched nurses downgrade her pain. They watched white patients move ahead. They watched staff roll their eyes when Daria said she was dying. Within 24 hours, the video had millions of views. Women shared their own stories. Stories of being dismissed, of being told it was hormones, of going home with prescriptions for anxiety instead of answers. Medical experts began commenting. Studies resurface proof that Black patients' pain is statistically undertreated, that assumptions shape care, that bias kills. The hospital had tried to defend itself. They claimed context was missing. Then a former nurse from that same spoke anonymously to reporters. There's a culture, she said. Certain patients aren't taken as seriously, especially if they're loud, especially if they're Black. Protests formed outside the hospital entrance. Candles lined the sidewalk. Maya's photo-bright smile. Warm eyes appeared on posters demanding accountability. Darius stood before cameras he never wanted to face. She told them it was a 10, he said. They told her it was a 6. An independent investigation was launched. Internal emails surfaced. Staff messages joking about frequent flyers. Notes describing patients as dramatic before exams were even complete. The resident who first examined Maya resigned quietly. The senior nurse was placed on leave, but none of it brought her back. Weeks later, the official report confirmed what Darius already knew. If imaging had been performed upon arrival, the rupture would have been detected in time. Preventable. That word echoed through every headline. Preventable death. Maya's children asked why their mother didn't come home. Darius struggled to explain how a place meant to heal had decided, silently and collectively, not to believe her. The lawsuit that followed wasn't just about money. It was about forcing change, mandatory bias training, policy revisions, pain assessment reforms. The hospital agreed to a settlement without admitting wrongdoing, but the footage remained online. Medical schools began using it in ethics courses. Students watched the moment the nurse changed her pain level. They discussed the power of assumptions. They analyzed tone, body language, delay. Maya's story became a case study, a warning, a mirror. On the anniversary of her death, Darius returned to the Onots as a patient, but as a speaker invited to address staff. He stood beneath the same fluorescent lights where she once waited. My wife trusted you, he said quietly. She believed that if she said she was in pain, someone would listen. Silence filled the room. Listening, he continued, isn't complicated. Believing someone isn't complicated, but ignoring them has consequences. Some narcissists looked ashamed. Others looked defensive. Change is slow. Culture is stubborn. But outside, the sidewalk mural painted in Maya's honor refused to fade. Her name became part of a larger conversation about bias, about humanity, about the cost of disbelief. Darius still replays the video sometimes. He pauses at the moment she squeezes his hand and whispers, "Something is wrong." He wishes he had shouted louder. He wishes he had demanded more. But the responsibility was never his. It belonged to the people in scrubs who chose comfort over curiosity. Assumption over action. The night Maya died, the monitors beeped steadily for other patients. The waiting room lights still hummed. The system continued, almost unchanged. But somewhere, in lecture halls and hospital boardrooms, her story unsettled those who watched. Because the scariest part wasn't the rupture. It was how ordinary the neglect looked. No shouting, no obvious cruelty, just subtle doubt, small delays, casual dismissal, and a woman who said 10 when her life depended on it. Now her voice echoes far beyond that waiting room 10. Believe her. The days after Maya's funeral blurred into each other, heavy and colorless. The house felt wrong without her laughter drifting from the kitchen, without her soft humming while folding laundry, Darius kept expecting to hear her keys at the door. Instead, there was only silent sand, the constant vibration of his phone. Reporters, activists, strangers who saw the video and couldn't sleep afterward. The clip had crossed 10 million views in 3 days, one particular moment replayed again and again online. The nurse's pen hovering over the clipboard as Maya whispered 10, and the nurse calmly writing 6. That tiny motion became symbolic. Comment sections exploded with rage. 10 former patients began sharing screenshots of their own discharge papers. Women describing ruptured appendices, misdiagnosed as menstrual cramps. Mothers recalling children sent home with viral infections that turned into sepsis. Doctors joined the conversation, too, some defensive, some apologetic, some admitting quietly that bias training in hospitals was often treated as a formality. Darius didn't care about debates, he cared about the 6 hours. An investigative journalist contacted him with something disturbing. She had obtained internal shift logs from the ER that night. Staffing levels were normal. Imaging rooms were open. The hospital had not been overwhelmed. There was no medical reason for the delay. The story shifted from tragedy to negligence. A week later, Darius received a call from the state medical board. They wanted his footage. They wanted a formal statement. He sat at the dining table where Maya used to help their daughter with homework and described, minute by minute, how his wife faded in front of him while professionals minimized her. "Did anyone raise their voice?" investigator asked. "No," Darius replied. "That's the problem. They were calm, like nothing was urgent. Calm indifference." That phrase appeared in headlines the next day. The hospital administration held a press conference, their tone polished and careful. They expressed deep regret. They emphasized complex medical variables. They avoided the word bias entirely. Outside the building, protesters chanted Maya's name. Among them stood a woman in scrubs, her hospital badge turned backward. She stepped forward when cameras approached. "I work inside," she said, voice trembling. "And what happened to Maya is not an isolated mistake. It's a pattern." She described informal conversations in break rooms, jokes about drug seekers, assumptions that certain patients exaggerated pain. She admitted she had once stayed silent when she should have spoken up. Her confession cracked something open. More staff members began reaching out anonymously. Screenshots of group chats surfaced. One message from months earlier read, "Room 12 says pain is 10/10 again." Another, "These people always think it's the worst thing ever." These people. The words felt like a verdict. Darius filed a wrongful death lawsuit, but he also demanded something else. Policy change written into the settlement. Mandatory second opinions when patients report maximum pain. Automatic imaging triggers for specific symptoms. Public reporting of awake times by demographic data. The hospital's legal team resisted. Then federal civil rights investigators announced they were reviewing the case. Everything accelerated. News panels debated implicit bias in medicine. Studies were quoted showing Black patients' pain often being underestimated. Medical schools invited Darius to speak about Maya. He stood in auditoriums filled with future doctors and showed them the footage. When the clip reached the part where Maya whispered, "I'm going to faint," the room always went silent. "What would you do differently?" he asked students. Hands slowly rose. "I'd order imaging immediately. I'd reassess vitals. I'd listen." Listening. The simplest intervention. Months passed before the official hearing. Darius sat in a wood-paneled room while hospital representatives answered questions under oath. The resident who examined Maya admitted he had assumed anxiety played a role before completing tests. "Why?" the investigator pressed. He hesitated. "She seemed tense. She was in pain," Darius said from the back of the room. The senior nurse acknowledged downgrading the pain scale based on clinical judgment. "What clinical evidence supported changing her self-reported number?" the investigator asked. Silence. The final report concluded that implicit bias likely contributed to delayed care. It stopped short of calling it intentional discrimination, but the damage to the hospital's reputation was irreversible. The settlement was substantial, but Darius redirected much of it into a foundation in Maya's name focused on advocacy for equitable emergency care. The foundation funded workshops, distributed patient rights cards, and launched a hotline for families who felt dismissed in medical settings. On the first anniversary of her death, a candlelight vigil filled the hospital parking lot. Nurses from other hospitals attended. Doctors held signs that read, "Believe patients." Maya's children released white balloons into the night sky. Darius knelt beside them. "Why didn't they help Mummy?" his son asked softly. Darius swallowed hard. "Because they didn't understand how serious it was." It was the gentlest version of the truth he could offer. Behind the scenes, change moved slowly but undeniably. The ER installed new protocols requiring documented justification before altering a patient's pain score. Electronic alerts flagged prolonged waiting times for high-pain cases. Diversity bias education became tied to performance evaluations instead of optional seminars. Some staff resented the scrutiny, others welcomed it. One nurse approached Darius quietly after a training session months later. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, she said. "I didn't realize how often I doubted certain patients more than others. Watching your wife's video forced me to confront that." "Will you do better?" Darius asked. Yes. That was all he ever wanted. Maya's story spread beyond the state. Advocacy groups cited her case and policy proposals. Legislators referenced her name while arguing for healthcare accountability bills. Her photograph, bright smile, warm eyes appeared in conference slides and research papers examining disparities in emergency medicine. She became more than a statistic. But grief remains stubbornly personal. Late at night, Darius still replayed their last conversation in the waiting room. He remembered how she apologized for causing a scene after screaming in pain. Even in agony, she worried about being perceived as difficult. He wished he had shouted earlier, demanded imaging immediately, refused discharge. Then he would remind himself, patients shouldn't need to wage war to be treated. One evening, nearly 2 years after her death, Darius received a letter from a stranger. A woman wrote that she had gone to an ER with severe abdominal pain. When a nurse suggested anxiety, she insisted on further tests, citing Maya's story. Imaging revealed a life-threatening condition caught just in time. "Your wife saved me," the letter said. Darius folded the page carefully and placed it in a wooden box filled with similar notes. Proof that her voice still moved through hospital corridors, whispering to patients to trust themselves, urging providers to pause before dismissing. The ER where she died looks different now. Fresh paint, updated equipment. A framed plaque near the entrance reads, "In honor of Maya Jefferson, whose story reminds us to listen." 10. People pass it every day. Some glance at it briefly, others stop and read the small engraved sentence beneath her name. Pain is what the patient says it is. Inside the waiting room, monitors still beep. Fluorescent lights still hum. People still arrive frightened and vulnerable. But somewhere, in the back of a nurse's mind, Maya's voice lingers. 10, not 6, not maybe, not anxiety. 10, and perhaps, because of her, someone else will be believed the first time they say it.